Maybe for now. Alright, test one.
Hi, my name's Matt Widgery from Matt Widgery Photography. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 manual focus prime lenses which work really well if you're converting them and putting them onto your Fuji cameras, your X Pro 1s and XT1s, XT2s, XT10s, etc. So the three lenses in question, they're all made by Nikon back in the sort of 70s and 80s. They're these manual focus lenses. This one actually is half the size that it looks because you've got the adapter on it. If you take the adapter off, that's the thing that you would sort of put in your pocket. It is really small. It's an entirely metal construction. It's a Nikkor 50mm 1.8, this particular one. The other one I'm going to be talking about is the 24mm 2.8 and also the 135mm 3.5. Those lenses, when combined with the Fuji X cameras, I think are the perfect focal lengths to use to get you into pretty much any situation that you want to shoot with. So the thing that I keep on the camera most of all is the 24mm lens. That's because in 35mm equivalents, you're talking about 35, 36mm. And for me, I like that a lot to shoot with. It's not uber wide, so you're not going to get distortion coming in from the sides of the frame and in people's faces and things like that. So you can do a little bit of portraiture and shoot, street and things like that where you want to have people's faces in there. But it's not as tight as a 50mm. So if you're in a tight space or you're shooting indoors, personally, I find it a little bit more practical to get out a little wider while still retaining that nice kind of flat field of view. The 2.8 aperture is obviously nice and bright. It's not as bright as the 50mm there, which is a 1.8, but in most cases 2.8 is perfectly fine. And don't forget that these were designed to be shot on film cameras where you were probably shooting maximum with maybe a 400 film or perhaps a few occasions more than that, but for the most part up 400 800 ISO was about where you were going to sort of stop out unless you were going to start pushing film. This camera of course is very good up to 6400 ISO, so with 2.8 you should be able to get most situations done. The second lens that I wanted to talk about, which is the perfect pairing, and if you only had the 2 of these lenses, these would be the 2 I recommended. This is the 50mm 1.8. There's also a 1.4 available if you do want something that's a little brighter. Again, it's about the same size as the 24mm. If you take the adapter off, it's about like that. For me personally, I like to keep a separate adapter on each lens just because it's more convenient. It's just easier to just take the whole thing off and swap it out camera to camera. These adapters, all they do is they put the correct sort of flange distance in from the back of the lens to where the sensor is to make it the equivalent of what it would be when it was originally on a Nikon film camera, and that was the back of the lens, and that part there would be where the film was. So the 50mm, this gives you a short telly. It comes in at sort of 75mm in 35mm equivalents. So that means it is really, really good for doing a bit of portraiture with. And with a 1.8 aperture lens, it will blur the background out nicely. Now, don't forget, obviously you're shooting on a crop sensor body, so you're not going to get quite the same background blur at 1.8 as you would if it was on a full frame camera. But if you have your subject, a decent distance from the background, you can blur things out very nicely. And the bokeh on these lenses is absolutely gorgeous. And with the combination of a 35 and a 75, that gets you something normal but wide-ish normal, and then something which is short telly. And actually, that is a classic combination. A lot of people, for example, would shoot with, a 35mm and an 85mm, for example, if they were just going to use 2 primes. This would be the equivalent of a 36 and a 75, which is, pretty close to it. And for most intents and purposes, that's kind of, will get you into most shooting situations that you would want to do, from, street to portraiture. You could do weddings with this quite happily as just a combination of these. Certainly lots of wedding photographers will shoot just with a 35 and an 85. However, certainly if you're doing something like weddings or a bit of portraiture or something where you want maybe just a little bit more length in the lens, a little bit more compression, the third lens, and it isn't again particularly big to carry around either, this is the 135mm. These ones come in a couple of flavours. There's this one which is the 3.5, and there is another one which is a 2.8. Honestly, the half stop doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Some people claim that the 3.5 is marginally sharper, but I don't know, people are always claiming these things about the lens they particularly own. I've not tried the other one, so I wouldn't like to say, but I do know that the image quality that comes off this lens is astonishing. Now, the nice trick about this is that this is a slightly different adapter to the ones that I've got on the other two lenses. The other two lenses are just a hollow tube with the right connectors on it, whereas this connector here is a focal reducer. So there's actually a glass element in this. So if you take the front and rear element caps off and have a look, there's glass in there, and what that's doing is it is retaining the original 135mm field of view from the lens that you'd get on a 35mm camera back onto the APS-C size sensor of the Fuji cameras. So that's rather nice, because without that, this turns into a 200mm. And although sometimes that's useful, a lot of the times it's just a little bit too long, in my opinion, to be used. Certainly, you know, if you're shooting a wedding or something like that, a lot of the time 200 is just a little bit too much of a throw. But by having this on there, you've got the equivalent of the 135, which is really nice. Now, don't forget that Fuji have just launched not too long ago, they launched their 90mm lens. And when you put a 90mm lens onto a crop censored body, it becomes a 135, and that's what this does. Now, there's one. This is the same focal length. There's one other trick that this focal reducer does, though. It's not just about giving you back the original field of view that you would get when you put this on a full frame camera. What it's also doing, because it's compressing the light down onto a smaller image circle. It's actually, as it does that, some physics happen, and it makes the image brighter. It's a little bit like getting a magnifying glass and sort of holding it onto a piece of paper. Eventually, like when you focus the beam, it gets brighter, and eventually you'll know, like, it gets hotter, and it'll burn the paper because it gets so bright. That's because it's focusing all those light rays down and making them super bright into a smaller area that would previously have filled up a much larger area. So what you've got here, although it's a 3.5, it actually works out at something like a 2.5. So this actually, when you're using a focal length reducer, gives you a brighter image circle, a brighter image than you would have been able to get when you put it on a full frame camera. And that means you can shoot with lower ISO and a higher shutter speed, which is particularly useful. Certainly the higher shutter speed when you're shooting with a longer lens, and shooting with lower ISO, of course, will just get you a better image, better image quality. So this little focal reducer here, by swapping this from lens to lens, you can put it on the 24mm lens, and this one, instead of being instead of this being now a 35mm equivalent, you put a focal reducer on there, you've got 24 back. So that means that you've got something which is actually pretty wide, and it's the equivalent of Fuji's 16mm that they make. And again, you get the same effect of the lens being brighter. So this one being a 24mm 2.8 makes it something like a 24mm 1.8, something like that. So it really does give you, in terms of brightness, it really does give you that extra stop of light, which allows you to shoot at a higher shutter speed and lower ISO. And of course, it works the same on the 50 as well. So from a 75mm 1.8, it gives you the equivalent of what would it be? It'd be back to a 50mm 1.2 in terms of the brightness. Bokeh, it would be the equivalent then of the 1.8. Remember, I was saying when I was talking about this lens that at 1.8 on a crop sensor body, you don't get the shallower depth of field, but with the focal reducer you do. So with just these three bits of kit here, like that, so you've got three lenses and three adapters, and you could even get away with having just the two adapters if you wanted. You wouldn't need to have like an extra shoot through if you didn't want to, but I just find it convenient. But that basically gives me a 24, a 35, a 50, a 75, a 135 and a 200, and all of that stuff I can squirrel about my person without even having to have a camera bag if I want. I can have this around my neck. I tend to shoot with these combat trousers, so I can put a lens in each of those, or a lens in a couple of coat pockets, that kind of thing. And it means that I've got 6 different focal lengths, really useful focal lengths that I can swap between at will and get pretty much anything that I want to out of that. It's a really versatile setup. So when you are looking at buying some manual focus lenses, consider what are going to be the most practical lenses. And for me, I would definitely consider something around the 24mm and something around the 50mm. They don't have to be Nikons, there's other manufacturers around, but I do happen to really like both the image quality and the build quality of these old Nikon lenses. And if you get a couple of adapters, one which is just a shoot through, which will give you the crop factor, so you've got the multiplication, and a focal reducer which gives you back the original what the lens was originally designed to give you, but a little bit more light as well, then you've got a really fantastic little system. And for actually not much money, certainly if you wanted to buy 6 lenses, from Fuji that would do this, or from any other manufacturer, you'd be into it for a few grand, right? So this is a very cost-effective way of getting involved. Now, of course, these are all manual focus lenses, and you do have to manual focus. But with the X Pro 1, you do have focus peaking on there. With the XT10 and XT1 and things like that, you have even better focus peaking because you can change the colours of the focus peaking to make it easier to see. So it's actually not as daunting as you might think. If you haven't tried it before on one of these things, give it a go and see how you get on before sort of investing in a bunch of money. You can get some of these lenses pretty cheaply off eBay and things like that, and the adapters don't cost too much either, especially the shoot-through ones. I think I paid probably for this one with the adapter on it, with the aperture ring changer thingy, swizzly thing. Aperture ring, that's what I'm looking for. I'll learn to speak English one of these days. So that one I think was a bit more money and might have cost me all of 50 quid. The one that's just the shoot through sort of tube, I think was probably nearer 20. These ones, they range a little bit. This is one of the cheaper ones off eBay, and it was under £100. The most expensive, but by the reports that come out of it and the reviews of it, arguably the best, is the Metabones adapter. For that, you could be looking at sort of between £350 up to maybe even £400. But even so, that's probably half the cost of one of these lenses. So, you factor it in, it actually works out pretty cost effective. So that's it. Please subscribe if you like this content and would like to be the first to see more of it. That would help me out a lot. If I get more subscribers on this channel, that definitely helps me. And leave your comments below if you have particular lens combinations that you like to use on your Fuji cameras. That's it. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.